Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving headfirst into a topic that often makes us pause, but its sensitivity really just highlights how vital it is. The age of consent, how society sees age and relationships, and that really intricate dance between biology, culture, and the law. It's complex. But our mission in this deep dive is clear. We're going to unpack the nuances, pull out some surprising insights from our sources, and hopefully help you navigate this whole area with, a bit more clarity.
Absolutely. And when we say unpack, we really mean exploring. The sources here aren't about giving easy answers. Instead, it's more like listening in on a dynamic conversation, exploring multiple perspectives. We're digging into everything from biological development
Right?
to these deeply rooted societal norms and looking at the crucial roles of law and education. The goal isn't to say this view is right, but to understand the different arguments, why they're there, and what they actually mean.
Okay, so let's start with something that really jumped out from the material, this contrast. In the animal kingdom, sexual maturity seems to be pretty much the only rule. Once an animal can reproduce, biologically speaking, that's it. Age gap doesn't matter. Nature just goes ahead. But humans, we've built these incredibly complex layers of guidelines. What makes us so different?
Well, that's the fundamental thing, isn't it? Human relationships aren't just biological. Not at all. They're deeply emotional, they're shaped by culture, and crucially, they involve power dynamics, things that just don't really exist that way for animals.
Power dynamics. Could you expand on that a bit?
Sure, we're talking about how things like greater life experience or emotional maturity, even financial independence, how those can subtly, or sometimes not so subtly, influence or even disadvantage the other person. Especially with a big age difference. Squirrels aren't negotiating emotional contracts before they mate.
Right, good point. And that difference brings us straight to a core biological argument in our sources, the human prefrontal cortex. The bit for complex decisions, impulse control, planning.
Executive functions, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It isn't fully wired up until we're around 25.
Right.
So even if a 14-year-old is physically mature, is their brain truly equipped to grasp the long-term consequences or navigate potential manipulation in a relationship?
That's a critical question. And interestingly, the research gets quite nuanced here. Cultural narratives seem to play a huge role in how we actually experience events. So the same situation might be processed as deeply traumatic in one culture, but may be seen as more neutral or just part of life in another. Anthropologists have noted, for example, in some tribal societies with very early marriage, people don't report the same kind of trauma that Western societies associate with it.
Okay, but that needs a big caveat.
Oh, absolutely, a vital one. This doesn't mean harm isn't happening, not at all. It just suggests it might not be named or processed or even acknowledged in the same way within that specific cultural context.
That's a really important distinction. And turning back to our societies, the data seems pretty consistent. Studies from the UK, the US, they keep showing early sexual activity with a much older partner is statistically linked to negative outcomes, like higher rates of depression, risky behaviors, poorer life outcomes down the line.
Right.
And what's really striking is that this link holds up even when you filter out the obvious, clear-cut cases of abuse.
So this leads to a really key question for you listening in. Are these negative outcomes happening mostly because society says this is wrong, creating a kind of shame-based trauma? Or is it more fundamental? Is the developing brain just not equipped to handle the complexity, meaning harm kind of happens naturally regardless of societal views?
And this is where that critical thinking cap needs to go on, isn't it? Statistically linked. Well, that usually means correlation.
Exactly, not necessarily causation.
And the sources really hammer this home. The context to the age gap is everything.
Absolutely everything. If we zoom out, the nuance is huge. For instance, research often shows more large age gap relationships in lower income communities. But those communities often face other major hurdles, right? Less access to good education, healthcare challenges, more instability.
Things that predict negative outcomes anyway.
Precisely. So the tricky question is the age gap the direct cause of harm, or is it more about the challenging environment being the main driver?
Yeah.
Then you flip it. In higher income or more educated settings, age gaps still happen, but maybe there are more buffers. Financial stability, parents involved, more opportunities. These might mitigate some negative outcomes.
But those cases get less attention, less reported.
Often, yeah, they don't dominate the statistics in the same way. And then there's that idea of someone being mature for their age. Studies sometimes suggest this perceived maturity isn't always healthy development. It can be an adaptation.
Like coping with difficult circumstances, growing up too fast.
Exactly. Growing up fast because of adversity, maybe trauma or neglect. So the very maturity could itself be linked to earlier harm.
Okay, but let's play devil's advocate a bit, drawing on the sources. Not every age gap relationship ends badly. And let's be honest, plenty of same-age relationships cause significant trauma through power abuse.
True.
I've even seen reflections in the material, people saying an older partner was actually less manipulative, maybe more caring, than a same-age one they'd been with. So personal experience can definitely push back against those broad statistical trends.
And that lived experience does find some echoes in research. You see case studies, qualitative stuff, showing situations where older partners are actively protective, nurturing, where there's a conscious effort to avoid control, build mutual respect, and genuinely give the younger person space to grow.
It seems like those positive cases hinge on the older person not leveraging their experience as power.
Exactly. They thrive precisely because that power imbalance isn't being exploited.
Which really throws this tension into sharp relief, doesn't it?
Right.
Between the nuances of individual relationships and the law. The law has to be broad. It assumes universal risk. It's kind of a blunt instrument.
It is. And thinking bigger picture, the core argument really shifts towards power imbalance being the real danger, not just age itself. Predators, as the sources point out, are opportunists. They actively seek out that naivete, that vulnerability. They use the age gap as a tool.
Yeah.
And we see some more power dynamics play out elsewhere, disproportionately. Like UK stats show about 73% of domestic abuse victims are women, most perpetrators male. It's a parallel example of how power imbalances, regardless of age, can manifest as harm.
Okay, so let's chew on a more provocative thought then. Let's imagine we could magically wave a wand and remove all the deliberate predators. Poof, gone. Would unintentional harm still happen in some age gap relationships just because of the developmental mismatch?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. Think about it. Say a 16-year-old and a 28-year-old, and the 28-year-old is genuinely well-meaning, no bad intentions at all. But that 28-year-old has navigated life stages the 16-year-old hasn't even reached yet. College, career, maybe living independently. So even without meaning to, their worldview, their established lifestyle, just the pace of their decision-making could subtly, maybe unconsciously, shape the younger person's path.
Going to steer them in directions they might not have gone otherwise?
Yeah, exactly. The sources sometimes call it things like passive shaping or identity absorption. It's not malicious. But it might lead the younger person to look back years later and think, wow, I kind of built my early adult life around them without really realizing it.
So for you listening, is that unintentional shaping still a valid reason for having age-based legal protections? Or is that just, a natural risk in any relationship, regardless of age?
And that connects to another point. We accept influence from others all the time, right? Parents, teachers, older siblings, bosses even. Their experience shapes us. So why do we draw such a sharp, legally enforced line specifically around sex and romance? What's compelling here is the idea that maybe education is the real key. Not just crucial, but maybe the only thing that truly equips people to advocate for themselves, think critically about power dynamics.
As opposed to laws that just restrict.
Right. Knowledge is power, as they say. It builds capacity, whereas laws just build fences.
That makes a lot of sense. We see influence from family or mentors as normal development. Why treat romantic influence so differently?
And there's solid research on this. The WHO did a global review. It found that comprehensive sex and relationship education, done well, actually reduces risky behavior. It increases respect in relationships and even tends to delay the average age of first sex.
So knowledge empowers better choices, more than just saying no.
It strongly indicates that, yeah, better decision-making seems linked to better understanding.
But then you get the counter-argument, the pushback. The law isn't really for the ideal scenarios, is it?
Yeah.
It's meant as worst-case protection.
Against predators, yeah.
And while education can definitely reduce risk, it probably can't eliminate predators entirely.
So that creates this tension, doesn't it? Should the law be that blunt, age-based shield designed primarily to stop predators? Or should it be more flexible, trusting that robust education allows for more nuanced choices, maybe earlier?
For me personally, looking at all this, I land on keeping the age of consent where it is. It feels like that essential safety net. Kids just don't develop at the same pace. Someone might look physically mature at, say, 15, but emotionally or cognitively, they're still very much figuring things out. That vulnerability exists, and the law buys time to learn.
But alongside that,
Yes, alongside that, we absolutely need to be embedding these concepts much earlier. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Even young kids, like 3 or 4, can grasp basic bodily autonomy.
your body, your choice. Simple framing.
Exactly.
And you're spot on. Research backs this up strongly. An NSPCC survey in 2021 found kids explicitly taught about consent and boundaries were way more likely to speak up about abuse and less likely to just accept harmful behavior as normal.
Makes sense.
Plus, offender psychology research suggests something interesting, too. Predators often test boundaries. If they meet someone confident, assertive, who clearly sets limits,
They move on.
they're much less likely to target them. Solid boundaries are a deterrent.
So if we build those skills, real autonomy, understanding boundaries, feeling confident saying no right from the start, in everyday conversations with kids, then the law becomes more of a backstop.
Right. Not the primary shield.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the practical challenge, though. If schools are often laser-focused on grades, maybe not so much on this life education, and if many parents, frankly, weren't taught these skills themselves, where does the responsibility lie? How does this happen?
Yeah, that's the big question for you listening. Do we need big government campaigns? Should social media platforms step up? Or does this really have to bubble up from the grassroots?
I tend to lean towards grassroots, personally. Governments, platforms, let's be real, profit often comes first. Change is slow from the top, but pressure from below, that can force change. History shows it. Well, think about Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MADD, in the U.S. They fundamentally shifted social attitudes. Or feminist groups back in the 70s and 80s dragging domestic violence out of the shadows and onto the policy agenda. Even #MeToo, regardless of how you view it, started with grassroots stories on social media, and it definitely shook things up.
Okay, but the sharp edge of that is grassroots change is often slow. It's patchy. It might only reach people already receptive to the message. So does relying on that slow cultural shift leave too many kids vulnerable in the meantime? Is it enough?
Or is it maybe the only path that leads to lasting change? Because top-down rules without cultural buy-in don't stick. It feels like what some call a two-track fight. You have to fight the immediate dangers, like blocking any attempts to lower the age of consent, which would be incredibly dangerous. But at the same time, you have to keep chipping away at the deeper cultural stuff, changing norms, building skills.
Like gardening. Pull the weeds, but also nurture the soil.
Exactly. That's a great analogy. Pull the weeds, the immediate threats, maybe using laws, but nurture the soil for long-term growth. That's the cultural work, the education. Laws protect, but culture truly transforms.
So bringing this all together, this deep dive really highlights that core tension. The age of consent acts as this vital safety net. We need it. But comprehensive education, starting really early, equipping kids with understanding and confidence, that's the true armor. It's the long game, but maybe the one with the biggest payoff.
Yeah, the key takeaway feels like this. Lowering the age of consent doesn't empower young people. Education does. Real empowerment comes from addressing the root issue, building skills around consent, boundaries, recognizing manipulation. It reframes the whole debate, doesn't it? Away from just arguing about an age number, towards understanding predators as opportunists who exploit gaps in knowledge and confidence.
So for you, listening today, here's the thought we want to leave you with. How can you, just starting in your own world, maybe in conversations with your kids, your family, your friends, how can you contribute to this vital cultural shift, this move towards empowering autonomy and respect from a young age? What tiny step could you take this week to help normalize these essential conversations, making them as everyday as talking about looking both ways before crossing the street?